In this lesson, we're going to be taking a look at radicals and rational exponents. So first up, just a little bit of vocabulary there. When we're talking about radicals, the number that we're finding the root of it, so like if I'm looking for the cube root, it's a 3. That's called the index. So whichever number is written small and kind of in the little crook of our radical there, that is the index of our radical. And the number that we're taking the root of, the number that is inside the radical symbol, that is the radicand. And so just kind of keep that in mind as we take a look at these, because as this vocabulary comes up, we just need to be able to remember all that stuff. All right, so we're just going to be evaluating some radical values here. So in this case, notice this is the square root of 8. And it says evaluate. Evaluate just means figure out what it equals. So you'll want to break out your calculator for this, and yes, have your calculator out and handy because you're going to be needing it to check some answers and see how some particular processes work on your particular calculator. But you're going to go ahead and now in your calculator type in the square root of 8, and it's going to give us a decimal. In this case, it is about 2.82842.7. It's a big long decimal that goes on and on and on, right? I'm going to go ahead and just round that to the 100th. I'll call that 2.83 to be approximate here. Anytime you're doing problems, though, formally, do check and see what it says to round it to. Now, make sure that you can get this particular number on your calculator before you proceed here. Depending on your particular calculator, you might press the square root button first and then press 8 and then equals. Or you might have to press 8 first and then press the square root button and it'll pop up this number. But do make sure you know how to do that before you go on. All right, next up, we're going to do the cube root of 8, which actually makes life immensely harder because most calculators do not have a cube root button. Some do, most don't. And so if it doesn't, we still need a way to be able to figure out what this equals. Now, in order to do that, we need to know about how these radicals can be written in a different way. A radical can also be written as an exponent that's a fraction. So basically, it's a fractional exponent. That's actually what rational means. Rational means it can be written as a fraction. So rational exponents are fractional exponents, and fractional exponents are radicals. So you'll notice here, if I take a look at this first line here, the index is the denominator of the fraction in my exponent. And the numerator there, that's any exponent that is on the inside of the radical. And oftentimes there isn't an exponent on the inside of the radical. And when that's the case, that x is like x to the power of 1, right? Which is why that would be the same as 1 over the index. This is worth putting into your notes. So write this down into your notes. I suggest you pause the video and then go ahead and press play once you have it down so we can take a look at how we'd use this. All right, so going back to the cube root of 8, if we want to calculate this on our calculator, and if our calculator does not have a cube root button, then we would actually have to be a little bit more particular with how we typed it in. So in order to type this in your calculator without having a cube root button, you would first change the format of it. You would first turn this into 8 to the power of 1/3. And then that's what you'll actually type into your calculator. And so on your calculator then, you will type in the 8, and then you'll say to the power of, which often is that little caret key. And then we need to say to the 1/3. But if you type in 1/3 like this, it's going to do order of operations on you, and it's going to do the exponent first, and then it's going to divide. And so when you go to type in a fractional exponent like this, you're actually going to want to make sure that you put in parentheses around that fraction. So you'd actually want to type it in like this, 8 to the power of parentheses 1/3. And then go ahead and press enter. And if all goes well, this should give you a nice pretty whole number because actually we kind of already know that the cube root of 8 is 2. Make sure that you can get it on your calculator as well, because otherwise this is going to be a lot harder because we're about to take a look at some of these that don't work out quite so nicely. So in our next problem here, we're going to figure out what the 7th root of 500 is. In order to figure that out then, I'm betting your calculator does not have a 7th root button on it. So instead you can turn this into 500 to the power of, not 7, 1/7. So we're going to do 500 to the power of 1/7. In order to type that in your calculator then, you're going to want to do 500 to the power of, parentheses, 1 divided by 7. And then make sure you can get that number out. The correct answer that your calculator should give you is about 2.43. So make sure you're able to get that out of your calculator here before moving on. Now that we've used rational exponents to calculate some values that maybe we couldn't have calculated before, we also need to use those to be able to simplify certain expressions. So you notice that here we have the 20th root of x to the 8th. This actually can simplify, and we can see it if we actually first turn it into the rational exponent. So I'm going to change it from radical form into exponent form. And so this is going to become x to the power of, remember that it's going to be a fraction. The index is my denominator, so that's the bottom of my fraction. The exponent on the inside, that's my numerator, so it's 8/20. So how can I simplify it? Well, notice that the fraction that we ended up with, 8/20, reduces. So I'm going to reduce that. So I can divide both top and bottom of that fraction by 4. So that means this is the same as 2/5. Okay, I got x to the 2/5 then. Well, in order to truly have it simplified, I do still need my answer in radical form. One of the rules of simplification is that you should have no fractions left in your exponents in your final answer. We have to use it in the work to get there, but shouldn't have it in the final answer. So we change this now back into radical form. So I know I'm going to have a radical. And in my radical, remember the denominator is my index. And then the numerator is the exponent on the inside. Now what's the exponent on? It's on the x. So it's going to be the 5th root of x squared. That is this one simplified. With that one in mind, then we can also look at simplifying a problem like this. And so here we have the 6th root of x to the 30th. In order to simplify it, the very first thing I want to do then is I want to rewrite it as a rational exponent. That will be x to the power of 30/6. Remember, your index is your denominator. And now I want to simplify that. So this is going to reduce down to be 30/6. Well, that becomes 5/1. But I definitely don't want to leave it like that, particularly because it makes no sense to say the first root of x to the 5th. This is not something we want to do. Remember, if nothing is written as our index, it's a square root. So the 2 is assumed, not a 1. All right? So rather than writing it as x to the 5/1, we just write that as x to the 5th. Well, notice there's no more fraction in our exponent. And so there's no need to turn it into radical form at all. And so x to the 5th would be the final answer.